Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the event so far. My name's Campbell Murray, and I'm going to be talking to you briefly about security engineering secrets, but I'll let you into the secret from the start, is that none of this is actually secret. Security engineering principles are well documented as an SDLC. There are books this thick written about it, but what I'm going to convey to you today, I work a lot in training and around security engineering and consulting with organizations post pen testing or post them having a pen test done by another organization or a red team. And I'm familiar with examining their processes and looking at their techniques and models. And there's a common couple of issues that are always prevalent in the majority of organizations' SDLC processes. So we're going to cover those today and show you how to do them properly. Well, show you how to do one of them properly. The first thing we're going to talk about is threat modeling. Now, threat modeling is a term that many people will be familiar with. No, not all of you will have done it as such, but suffice to say it's pretty prevalent around the engineering world. There are lots of different ways of doing threat models, lots of different models. The one we're going to be looking at today is Stride, because this one's pretty prevalent. It's based on Microsoft's threat modeling system, which you can get a free software download for that from Microsoft, which takes you through the process as well. Assist you with it. Pretty good. I do recommend it. There are about 12 kind of formalized threat model methodologies out there. Tara being quite a popular one. We see that a lot in automotive and manufacturing companies using Tara. Past is another popular one as well. But I'd say there's about 12. There's vast octave. There are loads. So take a look. Have a read through. What you find about each one of them is that they're simply acronyms. They describe the steps in the process. So Tara's threat assessment, remediation, analysis, and you perform those operations in that order. So we're going to take a look at Stride. Most people should have seen this. As I said, it's an acronym, stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, which I'll talk about in a moment, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. Now, I want to clarify repudiation because it's a term that I find not many people are actually that familiar with what it means. It really should say non-repudiation, but STNI wouldn't have the same ring as Stride, so I think that's why they say repudiation. And non-repudiation is the concept of every action cannot be repudiated, in that it's logged, it's recorded. I can't log onto a system and say I didn't. If I can, then I have a non-repudiation issue. So that's one of the things that we look at in this threat model. The steps that we take while we run through our Stride platform are to identify the threats. We need to rate the threats, and there are lots of different ways of doing that. I wish I had more time to go into risk rating for you today, but simply don't. And mitigating the threats. And there are different steps within all of those. When we identify threats, we can use Stride to classify the threats as well into the Stride platform. Rating the threats is quite complicated. CVSS is prevalent, but one of the things that we do find is an issue is the application of rating the risk in a consistent way. And if you have a large team, you may not all be working in the same part of the system, and you get one person's over on one building running the CVSS scoring system slightly differently to somebody else. You end up with different gates and a bit of a mess. So that's something else that we need to be aware of. That's a secret for you. So we're going to do a threat model. And I know you might chuckle, but we are actually going to threat model this door, because we can use threat modeling in everything. It doesn't have to be IT, it doesn't have to be information security. Everything that we look at, any kind of access control, anything that performs a function, be it physical or IT, can be threat modeled. And we're going to threat model this door. So for a start, we have to define, first of all, we need to understand what is the purpose of the door. Well, it's clearly an access control. It's to either let people in, let them out, or keep people in or keep people out. And that's the function. That's really everything that that door can provide for us. So let's look at it from that context of what its function is. Do we have spoofing vulnerability? Well, we do, because in the framework that we see there, in the context of that access control, it is just the door. Now, there's nothing stopping me from putting on a company t-shirt, high-vis jacket and a clipboard, or whatever, going in there, pretending to be somebody who's got legitimate access. There are no anti-spoofing controls. So that's one part of our threat model. Tampering, I'm going to roll that in with denial of service in this example, simply because tampering and denial of service are two different things. But because this access control is quite simple, as we said, it keeps you in or keeps you out, doesn't really do an awful lot else. We're going to put those two together. Non-repudiation. Well, there's clearly an issue here because there's nothing recording me coming in or out the door. If I put on gloves, so I don't leave fingerprints on the door handle, you can't prove in the current model whether I went through that door or not. So we have a repudiation issue. We have a clear information disclosure issue here. The windows, I can see through them. It's probably a pretty thin door. I hear conversations behind the door if I can get close enough to it. So we have a clear information disclosure issue. Denial of service, as I said, we're going to roll that in with tampering. I mean, we could look at it as tampering as being, we could change the locks so that you don't have the keys. That's a potential tampering issue. But that would also be a denial of service issue in this instance. That's why we're rolling them in together. Now, to deny service, to remove the functions that this door actually provides, I could put wood wedges under the sill to stop it from opening. I could wrap chain around the handles and padlock it. There's plenty of things I could do to stop that door from working, so we have a clear denial of service. And I like this example because when we talk about elevation of privilege, we don't really have any elevation of privilege issues here. And this is an important takeaway from any kind of threat modeling exercise, regardless of what methodology you're going to be using. Not every step is always going to apply, but we record it. We keep it as part of our threat model. And we need to record these. And this is another thing that I see not done properly. When threat modeling comes up in the SDLC, people run through their threat models, write notes down on the back of a piece of paper and go, right, go and fix those things or put those mitigations in place. Whereas we really need to formalize it and we need to record it so we can view our risk over time. And we can use something simple. This is a very simple table for recording our little threat model that we've just done. So the component is the door. We've got our stride methodology down the left, threat mitigation, whether the mitigation has been implemented and whether it's actually been recorded. And we keep these historically because when we go back, systems change and complex systems change all the time. You apply patches, something's changed. You need to go back and do that risk assessment, that threat modeling again. And we need to see what that change in the system, what effect has it had against our previous threat model, so we can really understand our risk granularly. So recording things and keeping these in an orderly fashion is something, again, which I don't often see in the majority of organizations. So another takeaway from threat modeling, and again, prevalent problem, the exercise must be done for every component and it needs to be regularly updated. So when we start doing threat modeling, it's easy when we're looking at mitigation to go, it's okay, we'll put CCTV on the door, that'll stop some of our issues, or we'll get a security guard, or we'll get ID badges, that electronic lock swipe you in. And it's easy to then expand your threat model out to, oh, well, what about the ID badges? What if someone loses them? What if somebody intercepts or fabricates CCTV? We've lost the plot of our threat model, and I see this all the time. We need to keep our threat model down on the component. So if we have a typical, very, very simple DMZ here, firewall, some kind of service application, API, website, whatever, and a database on the back end, when we start the threat model, it's very easy for us to lose track and encompass all of the components. But a top tip, if you're doing threat modeling, is just focus on one component, do that threat model before moving on to the next. And when you've completed those focused threat models and you've recorded them, then you can put them out. But you need to gain that granular information on each component. You can also think of it as where data flows. So it might be a cluster of components, but you're threat modeling the security of the data in transit, for example. And you can threat model that and use a cluster, but that needs to be an individual threat model. And like I say, that's a prevalent problem, one that I see people do incorrectly all the time. But threat modeling is a very powerful tool when done properly. And if you choose a threat model that's appropriate for your risk appetite and for your organizational culture, that works well with your dev teams and your security teams, then you do tend to stick with one. And that, again, is also an issue that we see, that there's no reason why you can't use more than one threat model type, more than one methodology. There's no reason why you can't use Stride and then go back and revisit things and run them through Tara or Octave. Absolutely no reason at all. And keep those threat models separate. You can interlink them, you can cross-reference against them. And in doing so, in doing this exercise, it's quite time consuming, not going to lie. And I think that's why people do just kind of like skip on it and go, let's just get this done. Let's look at the whole thing and threat model the system as one entity rather than focusing down on components, is because it's quite laborious. However, with discipline and with a good SDLC, which we'll talk about next, threat modeling is a very, very powerful tool. And SDLC, which we're going to talk about for a few minutes now. Now, I teach a course on SDLC and security engineering, and it's 4 days long, but I have less than 10 minutes to talk to you about it now. So we're really going to fly through it really quickly. But the purpose of the SDLC is to give a rigid milestone approach to your development. So components like threat modeling are a part of the process, and following the SDLC rigidly and hitting those milestones and completing those actions correctly and thoroughly is the keystone to making an SDLC work. It truly is. What is it, though? I mean, it's a formalized process. The idea is to gate bugs and design issues in your code, your architecture, whatever it is you're building. And again, just like we threat model the door, there's no reason why you can't have an SDLC around anything else. If you're doing a weekend project at home, doing some DIY, or maybe fixing a car, restoring a motorcycle, whatever you're doing, you can design an SDLC around that activity, and following that removes the danger, our inherent kind of procrastination to just skip parts and go, oh, I'll just do it like this because I'm hungry and I want my lunch. If you follow the SDLC, it's hard to go wrong. You're not going to make it perfect. Of course, we know that, but it improves matters. And there have been studies done on how much extra effort is required to just go, let's just build the thing, as to let's design an SDLC and we'll build a thing to the SDLC. And the studies indicate it takes about 11% more effort, which when you actually think about it, it looks like a lot of effort, but the actual elapsed time and resource that goes into making, using the SDLC to produce a better, well-documented product at the end is only 11% more time, so 111% of just doing the thing. So it's a marginal increase in effort to create a better product. But we'll run through an SDLC quickly. There's no real rules around SDLC. I've seen lots of different ones. I've seen 5-stage ones, very common. I worked with a company who had a 17-stage SDLC, which was really complete, and they were very, very good. They stuck with it rigidly. Well, we'll take a look at it. There are commonalities between all SDLCs, or at least there should be. All SDLCs should cover these basic points, or at least touch on these subjects. So there are many formal methods. There are some great books out there about software development lifecycle. A lot of companies, as I say, they've developed their own. They might be using a formalized method, or they might have tweaked it to suit themselves a bit. That's very common. Nothing wrong with that at all. But all SDLCs should cover these basic subjects, which is training first. Make sure everybody's got the same level of training and that they have the core competencies. Designing the requirements. We all do that. That's pretty straightforward, but formalizing that stage is key to developing your SDLC. Your design requirements, not just how many users does this need to satisfy in your requirements, but your design requirements around how does the data flow, what are the user stories, and having awareness of those so we can build them into our threat models as well. How are we going to implement it? What do we do when we release it? And something that's often missed out is how do we respond to an incident? And whilst I've seen the response piece in formalized SDLCs around organizations, that tends to be the part of the picture that's the least well developed. Because once it goes out of dev and into prod, it becomes a security team's problem, right? But the devs are going to have to respond at some point. If a bug is found, it's not the security team are going to go and refactor the code, right? It's the dev team are going to have to do that. And so a response plan around, we missed something, how do we deal with that, is often there, but not very well developed. But it's probably one of the most important pieces. Now, this is an SDLC example that I've seen in several organizations. It's not quite the 17-step one, but it's getting there. So as we said before, establish core training. Now, this is crucial. Now, this might be learning threat model. One of the core bits of training that have to be done is how to rate the risk. If you're using CVSS, make sure everybody's using it and applying it in the same way. Because otherwise, if somebody's not doing it properly, they might rate a risk too low or too high. And that could put a stopper in your development process. If the risk is rated too high, you might be spending unnecessary effort trying to fix that. If it's rated too low, it's below the bug gate, and then you might put a vulnerability into your code without realizing it. So that core training is absolutely essential. Establish the security requirements. Of course, what is it you're protecting? Is it personally identifiable information? In which case you have a higher security requirement to, I've got a database of pictures of cats, or whatever you're building. You have to look at the data and say, What is it? How much protection do I need? And what are the issues here? And what about reputational issues? That it might not be personally identifiable information, but what happens if my website, my API, my app, whatever I'm building, that gets compromised and I'm rinsed publicly, humiliated, and I have a reputational damage issue? You have to think those things through. Creating and agreeing the gates is where do you stop? What is important enough to make you stop and go back in your SDLC? And that's an organizational, it's fed by your security requirements. All of these do follow on logically. Not all organizations will do them in the same order, but there is a logical progression to it. Performing risk assessments, that's a bit outside of the SDLC. That is a security function. And so that's where dev teams work with security teams to perform some risk assessments. The design requirements, we spoke about those already. Attack surface reduction. Once you've got a rough idea of what your app's going to look like, have you applied the principle of least privilege there? Have you actually reduced everything? Do you need that login? Do you need that user functionality? And then we're on to our threat modeling. The rest of them on the right-hand side of my slightly wonky list there. The tool list is very important, agreeing tools. There are issues that become inherent in any development. If somebody's using Mac with Visual Studio and somebody else is using Linux with some other IDE, you've got different code standards. It might work, but it's much better, it's much easier to clean up and fix a project if everybody's using the same tools and you've recorded what those tools are, including version numbers. Deprecating unsafe functions is a secondary SDLC process. If you're coming to update an application, you can look at it, look at the bill of materials, which you will have because you'll have threat modeled it and you'll know everything that's in your application. And you can look and say, that SSL library, are there any vulnerabilities with that have become known since we released this app? If there are, get rid of it, update it. So get rid of those. The rest of it's kind of active, ongoing, doing your own security reviews, dynamic and static analysis of your source code. Fuzzing is something I often don't see in development models because it's not well understood quite often and people don't realize the value of it, but it is an important part. It's debatable whether people are going to do that or not. I always recommend it, but you know, not everybody really sees the value in it. Reviewing that attack surface all the time. And again, number 13 here is that release piece, and that's the incident response plan. And also the archive. So the archive and incident response plan are key in the SDLC and in the security process in general. Just because if you have a checksummed archive of your code, if somebody out there in hackerland releases a vulnerability and says, yo, you know, this code is vulnerable, how do you know that they haven't tampered with your code, that they haven't reverse engineered it, changed it, recompiled it, and then said that code's vulnerable? The only way you can prove that is if you have an S-Crowd archive of your original code, and then you can say, that's not our code. And you can't do that if you haven't followed through with your incident response plan, the final review, and the archive. So, key takeaways, bug gates and bars, having a methodology for rating is absolutely crucial. As I say, rating CBSS, I do it. I'm a penetration tester, red teamer. I do it all the time. And even between two experienced pen testers, they're going to argue about what the CBSS score should be. So this is why even in development, it's crucial that you have a standardized methodology for doing that score. That's a real big takeaway. And of course, I can't underline enough that what is often frequently forgotten about are those incident response plans and code archive. So whilst not secrets of SDLC, I hope what I've giving to you today is a bit of an insight into some of the common problems that I see as a consultant around both code reviewing and also working with organizations and training them. I've been into many large, well-known organizations and sat with dev teams for 3 to 5 days and gone through their processes and taught them how to do code analysis and looking at their code and showing them where they could improve. But the incident response plan and code archive are often missed out. And they are very, very important parts. So that's a very quick takedown on an absolutely enormous subject. So it's quite contentious. I'm sure lots of people will say, no, we did all of that. And lots of people will go, oh, yeah, that was interesting. But I hope it was interesting. Great to talk to you all and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Oh, I forgot. Here's a reading list for you before I go. If you do want to read more about security engineering, these 3 books here are excellent and highly recommended. So, it's particularly Security Engineering by Ross Anderson. So, on that note, I will say goodbye. Thank you very much, everybody.